So as we talked through, I said, we'll help you realize what you really need to do is go to these people and say, you know, this is what I need help with. Or I could use about a half an hour of your time to talk about this. Because otherwise, this vague term of mentoring gets lost in the, you know, the ionosphere up there somewhere, where the idea of what is this going to be. So the key issue here is, I think, that even though this is the kind of the classical walking them through the learning how to archery and wrestling, we're probably not doing too much of that. Oh, actually, there's some good analogies to that. But it really moves into a more specific use of what is it you really want from that person, and what is it that you can give them. And we'll come back to that again. Now, I mean, you can, if you go in the mentoring literature, there's nothing you can get lost in faster, believe me, in terms of everyone's personal views and list of roles and what have you. So, this is one particular list from reference down there in the bottom. And, there's 7 here, but teacher, sponsor, advisor, agent, role model, coach, confidant. If you think about this is, my God, this is more than a marriage. If you think about what we tend to ask in these global relationships, and at one point, and the other thing is that we tend not to think about is many times these things trip over each other, and many times you can actually be in conflict potentially, because okay, I'm supposed to be your sponsor or your advocate, but at the same time, I may have to be on a departmental committee that's evaluating you. So we tend to have many mixtures of roles that we play with each other, and they can very easily trip on each other, and conflict with each other if we're not careful. But any one of these, these are all elements that you're involved with particularly as a guide for a younger person getting started. But you don't not necessarily always have to play all those roles. For example, some of the people that I've had this unbelievable, wonderful experience with mentors throughout my career. I mean, I could spend the whole time talking about all of them, just been really lucky in that regard. But for example, some of them were not role models. Some of them are people, well, this is not a person I will be like, but I can really learn from them, and that's okay. So I think also sometimes we get caught up in this idea that I have to be this perfect thing, this perfect mentor for the person. It's like, no, you don't. You can be very carefully, keeping track of what elements of these that, you can be. So for example, you can be a teacher for a person, as it's really helping them learn something new. Well, is that a mentor? Yeah. Is we think of them as mentor? No. But all of these things are really completely intertwined with this whole process as you go through. Some people, and again, you get in personal philosophies, like for some people, they don't want to be a confidant. I'm sorry, I will be your professional guide. I will give you some things, but I'm really just being your confidant when you've got problems. That just is not the role I'm going to play. And that's fine if you set those boundaries up and everyone knows what those are from the beginning. So it's really the idea of being clear in who it is you want to be and what you can be in each of these relationships. Because fundamentally, these are all relationships. So they're fundamentally guided by all of the richness and all of the minefields of the of relationships that we experience throughout life. Again, you have all these additional skills that as mentors, you really, some of the most important things you can do, particularly in these ill-defined fields, is to help people figure out, okay, what is the future? What are the options in the future? If I choose and want to go this route, how is it I get there? Much of the time we talk about the main role of especially senior people is to really bring junior people into your community, into your, the professional community of being on committees, introducing them to people, because again, this is a relationship world that we live in, and many times it's really hard to get started in those relationships. So many times as senior people, that is perhaps the most important thing you can do, because otherwise, it just is really hard to make that link into next professional steps. Some of these things, persistence, focus, time management, how to handle the natural desire for credit. Like time management, for example. How many of you feel you're really good at time management? They're not, we all struggle with that. So sometimes even as mentors, but again, you allow the person to talk through and say, well, this is what I'm trying to do, but this is what I'm getting hung up in. And like the earlier this morning, they talked about having blocks of time to work on professional things is the only way. Having an hour here or an hour a day, 5 days a week is nothing like having a 5-hour block of time that can shut out the world, because you can't necessarily shut off the world in a 1-hour block. All of these are additional skills that you may be needing to help younger people. The problem that we're running into is the whole generational changes. I'm sure all of you have been hearing about and talking about it. From what I can tell, these are really big generational changes that are happening. If you look at the 20-somethings coming through the world right now, they're real different people than we were, at least than I was. I can't speak for all of you. But I think this reality of life and life interests and how value time, I think we've just begun to see huge changes that are going to be happening in the next 10 to 15 years. These are real big changes. So all of the studies show that the people that even medical students coming to medical school today, they're in residence. They hear many people talk about now. It's like, well, it's 5 o'clock. Isn't it time to quit? And it isn't necessarily they're not willing to work, but in their clocks, they're tired of being in this one place. They want to get home to the internet. They want to get home to where they're going to learn on their own, or where they have a life. And their interest in not having a life is not the same as our interest in not having a life. So these are really fundamental generational changes that I think, as mentors, we're going to have to be in some really interesting times ahead. Again, as we're talking with junior people about picking mentors, you really are looking for all of these kinds of things in a person, and they're looking at you in all of these different domains. So, for example, some people, when they're young, they really want to envision themselves moving into a leadership position in the future. Other people have no interest in that. So if you're, say, playing a role of a leader within your department, within your community, then potentially let yourself kind of be advertised and make it known that you're happy to play that role for someone. But if someone is coming in and they have no interest in becoming a leader, and you're trying to help them be molded into a leader, again, this is where you may not necessarily be on the same page. So think about what are the areas that even you would be most comfortable, most interested in mentoring people for. We all have different values in terms of how we want to spend our time. So trying to align yourself with people coming to you so you're able to most comfortably and most efficiently kind of be a guide for people who are wanting to go in that direction, I think is really critical. Now the bad mentor. I want to ask if any of you are bad mentors. We won't go to that stage. But I think all of us have had times where we've had bad mentors. And what's interesting, our research is looking at mentoring. And what's interesting is many times you find people, you're not necessarily deterred by a bad mentor. Sometimes they are. But it really can be a whole lot of waste of time, a whole lot of difficult time. And so part of the, particularly in the graduate world, a lot of our time has been spent trying to keep graduate students and postdocs from ending up in a bad mentor. The problem with that is I'll have students over the years come to me and say, well, can you tell me if so-and-so is a good mentor? And I say, well, that will depend. In a few cases, you've got really the toxic people that you have your quiet little book underneath, not really the published blacklist, but after 10 people have not survived in that lab, you don't need rocket science at this point. But the more important question is, but for whom? Because at the same time, we may have 2 people in the same lab. One couldn't be happier, the other couldn't be more miserable. Or even the same thing with clinical fellows. I'm sure you see it, where sometimes these things really work and sometimes they don't. So again, it comes down to this really close alignment of what is that person looking for, how do they view the world, how does this other person view the world, and how do you align with the people who are coming to you for guidance in one form or another. Again, the mentoring as a process, and I really do think of mentoring as a process. It's actually, again, in the more laboratory-based research world, where we tend to have people who work with us for 3, 4, or 5 years sometimes, this is a real developmental relationship over time. And some of your relationships may be that way, some of them may be smaller. But for example, this identification or alignment with core values.